Good evening. You're watching One Voice, brought to you by Asia One, and I'm Kerry Alexandra. This week, we're looking at the ways the war in Iran is being fought beyond the battlefield. Tonight, we'll discuss the economic impact of the war and the way it's being weaponized. The pressure the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is putting on the global price of oil and the stock markets, and the pressure that it in turn is putting on Donald Trump, who has always pitched himself as a president who's good for the economy. But that isn't the current reality, and with midterms on the horizon, that's a problem for him. As tensions continue to escalate between the US and Iran, the strait remains closed, fuel prices remain high, and so does the pressure on Donald Trump to do a deal. But the Iranians, it seems, are in less of a rush. They've lived with suffocating sanctions and economic isolation for decades, and to a degree have found workarounds. Demonstrating an ability to adapt through diversified trade, regional partnerships and economic self-reliance, the Iranian economy has continued to function under sustained pressure, and even as damage to infrastructure during the conflict threatens its sustainability further. The Strait of Hormuz is very much the eye of the storm, with only a handful of ships gingerly passing through it, with strict understanding that this passage is granted by Iran only because they belong to nations not involved in the conflict. But these ships represent only around 3 to 6% of its usual traffic, and that's starting to have an impact, one that's being felt across the Middle East and ultimately around the world. From disrupted trade routes and travel to rising fuel prices and political pressure on governments to pass measures to cushion the economic strain, this all puts on their economy and daily life for their people. The United States, while still the largest economy in the world, is facing growing uncertainty, many would argue as a result of its own president and his somewhat unusual foreign policy. With rising energy prices, inflation, delayed policy responses beginning to really affect ordinary people, businesses and long-term growth, where does that leave a president who campaigned on being an asset to the US economy? And on the other side of the table, the Iranians, how has their economy managed to survive and in some ways adapt to decades of pressure from economic isolation and strict sanctions that now leaves it perhaps less vulnerable to the immediate economic impacts of the conflict? And how is this economic and energy standoff between the US and Iran impacting other countries in the region and beyond in the global economy? And what happens if it isn't resolved? The conflict is frequently being framed in military terms, but beyond the battlefield, how significant is the economic dimension becoming? Are we already seeing tangible financial consequences on both sides? Masood Khan, former US and UN ambassador and veteran diplomat, thank you so much for joining us to examine this. Let me start by asking you, how much of an impact is this currently having on the Iranian economy? Is it as bullish as their leadership? And is the Trump administration starting to feel the pressure of its apparent nonchalance for doing a deal?
Well, if you compare the two countries, Iran and the United States, Iran has been devastated, and there has been economic degradation of their economic infrastructure, also their production facilities, like you have steel industry, you have energy plants were also hit, and critical infrastructure has been, of course, targeted by the United States and Israel. So I think they are in an economic mess, but to their credit, they have been resilient, and they have been managing the economy contrary to the calculations of Israel and the United States. On the other hand, if you look at the United States, it's the biggest economy in the world, and it's a very, very resilient economy, and it can absorb shocks, although there are concerns of the consumers in regard to the petrol prices and also these rising food prices and overall impact of this volatility in the markets. I mean, the stock prices going up and down, and the oil prices spiking. This all is affecting American economy and the international economy. So I think that there have been very dire economic consequences of this war. The IMF and World Bank have given very ominous warnings that if you do not stop the war right now, IMF has said that the global growth rate could plummet from 3% to 2%, and the inflation could rise from 4 to 6%. And the large population of the world, which is under the poverty line, they could suffer more. There could be more people who could be forced to live under the poverty line. So that's why it is important that there should be mediation, that there should be de-escalation, and that this whole war should culminate in a diplomatic process leading to a permanent ceasefire and resolution of long-standing disputes between Iran and the United States, between Iran and Israel.
And as you've already said, we're seeing rising fuel prices and increased uncertainty as a direct result of this conflict. How is the conflict now starting to impact ordinary Americans? We've seen a number of protests, of course. And where does that leave President Trump as he approaches the midterms at an increasing rate of knots?
Well, President Trump is very confident, and his entire team is bristling with confidence. And they think that this is a temporary phase and they can deal with it, and that this was an important war. They said that there was imminent threat from Iran, and they had to address this threat one way or the other, and that's why they started the war. But I think that the citizens of the United States of America, they have raised questions about the objectives of this war. The Democrats, of course, they try to steer a resolution censuring the president for not seeking the permission of the Congress or consent of the Congress in accordance with the U.S. Constitution. And there is, of course, in his own MAGA base, there are several questions about the ultimate objective or benefit of this war for the American people. But at the same time, you have to keep in mind that American administrations and American presidents particularly are very powerful. And given the past record of the past presidencies, President Trump is all powerful. I mean, he gets away with everything. He didn't consult the Congress. He also overruled his own military advisors and military commanders. And now we're in the middle of a war. So I think that, and traditionally the United States, when it was in, for instance, war in Iraq or war in the Vietnam War, they ignored all the demonstrations that were held. So there is pressure, but the United States has, and its leadership has the absorptive capacity to deal with these protests. They want to achieve their objectives, and they're determined about it. I mean, one of the proofs of that resolution or resolute campaign is that they are beefing up their naval presence in the region around the Strait of Hormuz, in the Gulf of Oman, in the Arabian Sea, and beyond. So on the one hand, they are beefing up their coercive actions, and on the other, they have trusted Pakistan to play the role of a mediator. And I think Pakistan has embarked on a two-pronged outreach to Iran, to the United States, and also add to that kind of consensus, regional consensus that Pakistan is building after consultations with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey.
And are the Iranians leveraging this pressure on President Trump, the pressure he's facing from his own people, in their ongoing strategy of keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed to all but a few ships?
Well, the two sides are eyeball to eyeball. As a matter of fact, I mean, if you go by their statements, they are, in regard to diplomacy, their statements are maximalist. If you go to the operational side, the Iranian side has not only survived this attack, huge attack, from the strongest army in the world and from the strongest regional army in the world, their joint operation, Iranians have survived. So this is their triumph. And they are also, I mean, when they blockaded the Strait of Hormuz, claiming their sovereign right to charge tolls, which is unprecedented because most or all of the straits around the world, there's free passageway. There are no tolls charged there, whether it is Strait of Malacca or whether it is Strait of Bab el-Mandab or Turkish or Danish Straits or the Strait of Gibraltar. So I think this is a new precedent. So this shows their leverage. And they have made the Strait of Hormuz the most effective way of countering United States kinetic operations. Although in the beginning it was not kinetic, but now it has turned into a military weapon that they are using. And at the same time, I would say, while this maximalist military and diplomatic posturing goes on, there is appetite in both capitals, Washington and Tehran, to move to the negotiating table to demonstrate some pragmatism and flexibility vis-a-vis each other, so that there's an end to this war, because the United States president doesn't want this war, a prolonged war, a forever war, because he contested his last election on the platform of pulling out of forever wars and focusing on America. His platform was America first. So, and in Iran, of course, I mean, it makes sense that after this devastation, and this devastation is substantiated by the fact that thousands of attacks have been launched by the United States and Israel. So they are devastated, the economy is devastated, the infrastructure is in bad shape, their military capability has been attacked, and it has been, I mean, in certain areas, the United States claims that it has been obliterated. Whatever the facts about the military capability or economic survivability.
Thank you so much for joining us. Really useful to have your perspective on this story. Joining us tonight, Professor Shahida Wazirat. Let's start broadly. This conflict is frequently framed in military terms, but beyond the battlefield, how significant is the economic dimension becoming? Are we already seeing tangible financial consequences on both sides? Professor Shahida Wazirat, thank you so much for joining us. Perhaps you could share your thoughts on this.
Yeah, certainly. Actually, I mean, the conflict is affecting something which is very, very basic needs of the economy. I mean, petrol and CNG and LNG. So that is why it's going to have a lot of effect, not only on the real economy, because obviously when prices of petrol rise, all the prices rise, because petrol is used for transportation, it's used for generating electricity, especially in Pakistan. And that is why it will increase, there will be a massive increase in prices in Pakistan and all over the world, in fact. And then also the fact that it's already affecting the stock market, and from the real market, the effects are going to the financial markets now. And another very important thing that's going to happening is that it's creating a lot of uncertainty. And you know, economic models are based on certainty. And when we have a situation like this, we don't know how long this crisis will take to get resolved. And that is why there's a lot of uncertainty. And that uncertainty will affect the real market as well as the financial market. And we are already noticing that it is affecting the stock exchanges. It is affecting the bond market.
So, Professor, from your perspective, how is this conflict impacting ordinary Americans as well? We've seen a number of protests. Where does this leave President Trump as he approaches his midterms at an increasing rate of knots?
Yes, obviously, you see the economy, if the economy is, there are lots of problems in the economy and the people are, the prices are rising, inflation is rising. So obviously, this will affect the social sector and the political. I mean, obviously, if prices are rising, then people will start, there will be lots of unrest in their society. And then people will start agitating against the government, particularly a government that they feel is responsible for the crisis. And I think from there, it will go to the political, the politics will get affected also, besides the economy.
Thank you so much for joining us. Really useful to have your perspective on this story. Although a ceasefire has been reached between the US and Iran after talks in Islamabad last week, the impact of the war continues to worsen. To discuss this, we are joined now by Farhad Ibn Masood, who is a Middle Eastern aviation expert. The conflict is frequently framed in military terms, but beyond the battleground, how significant is the economic dimension becoming, do you think? And Farhad, how is it playing out in the Middle East? What impact is the rise on the cost of fuel having on daily life there, air travel, for example?
So, I would quote this as war by other means. The economic side, as we call it, is playing a bigger role than the decisiveness of the military battlefield. The Hormuz Strait is a prime example, which is about 20% of the world's oil. It has had ripples of an effect on a globalized world. The butterfly effect, as we call it, it's been felt far and wide, as the international energy analysts have mentioned. Just a prime example, the petrol prices have leapfrogged in a global arena since late February by about 30 to 50%. That's a whopping number. The common man is feeling the pinch at the pump. Higher transport fares, rising food costs. And it is always said, when the tide rises, all boats are lifted. But in this case, when fuel prices rise, all budgets are sinking. Jet fuel prices are no exception. They've been doubled, if not tripled, in multiple regions. Higher ticket prices, reduced flights taking place, cancellations, as per Reuters and other industries or news channels. This is simply echoing the oil shocks of the 70s, where air travel or global supply chains were disrupted hugely. So on the flip side, the Iranians are making or surviving rather decently with limited oil exports from about 1.7 to 1.8 million barrels per day. Shipping data from Kepler depicts this. We've also seen that sanctions rarely break a determined nation overnight. Iran is simply surviving through adaptation, not thriving, but it is doing decently well, if not very well, in the present economic situation.
Can I ask you, how much of a knock-on effect is there in the Middle East of the Strait of Hormuz being closed and fuel prices across the board?
Oh, knock-on is always there, the butterfly effect. And in a globalized world, interconnected world of today, no man is an island. The economy will have ripples flying through it on a regional and a global scale. Higher oil prices certainly have affected the GCC exporters on the short term, but the uncertainty, that's the problem area. It has driven up shipping insurance costs. It has disrupted the global supply chain, as per Reuters and various energy market analysts. Not to mention the common man, the household and the businesses. They are experiencing rising costs for the common elements like bread and eggs. Haulier firms, on the other hand, are passing the higher diesel prices, feeding directly into food inflation. This is once again a painful reminder of the 73 oil crisis, which caused widespread economic pain. Iran, on the other hand, once again, has exercised selective control of the Hormuz Strait as a major leverage point, allowing only limited traffic. Oil prices have skyrocketed 100 to 110 per barrel since February, presently about 97 to 102 as of today. These regional disruptions are contributing to higher energy costs. As an example, again, USA has seen $4 per gallon a rise since these conflict areas have become a normal day of the affairs.
Farhad, you mentioned a little earlier Iran adapting. How resilient is the Middle East economically and strategically to a sustained conflict in the region, do you think?
So resilience is what the Middle East has depicted. Lesser at some points, greater on the other. But once again, it simply says that whatever doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. In this case, though, at a very high cost. Iran's adaptation has identified parallel systems, which includes shadow fleets, barter trades with countries like China, limited oil exports. Yes, it has damaged its economy, where analysts are projecting a possible 10% GDP contraction, while rise in inflation and food prices. The GCC countries, on the other hand, are drawing on a strong financial reserves. We know they have sovereign wealth funds. They are accelerating investments into defense portfolios like the counter UAS, counter drone technology, air defense systems, not to mention the missile defense, which has taken major hits. Renewable energy is another element. So these are hard lessons for those who fail to prepare, and on the flip side, they prepare to fail. So traditional dominance has also been challenged. Asymmetry is the buzzword going around right now. Low cost per shot is what is looked or sought after in case of air defense systems. There are threats, guerrilla tactics, cheap technology is sought after as well. And this is changing modern warfare or history as we know it. So Middle East overall, notable resilience, yes. Through diversification, yes. There are informal networks which are being exercised. Deeper instability is what is happening, and this is affecting higher long-term costs as well. Jaw is much better than war. So diplomacy, backdoor, covert, coercive, whatever. But negotiation tables have to remain open. Communication channels need to continue to make sure things make sense for the common man and the global economy at large.
Ifar had a really useful overview there of the Iranian economy and the wider Middle East. Thank you so much. As the conflict rumbles on with no clear end in sight, it seems increasingly it's a war measured not just in firepower but in economic impact on both sides, be that ahead of US midterms or in terms of failing to have sanctions lifted in Iran. Because in today's world, the strength of a nation is not just defined by its military, but frequently by its ability to either address or endure economic pressure. You've been watching One Voice on Asia One. I'm Kerry Alexandra. Thank you so much for joining us.